should fantasy football players react to Dak Prescott's injury? That and more this week on the couch. The Sage, Bob Harris. Bob, what's the correct reaction to this Dak Prescott thumb injury?
Total panic. No. And like I'm like the person who says never panic. This is not good, right? I mean, but I think mostly because it already wasn't good. The offensive line, clearly some issues. Although Tyler Smith was fantastic. The surprise of the night was him holding up. But I mean, anytime you're wheeling Jason Peters in, granted, he's been a great player, but he is also 40. Turns out offensive linemen don't grow on trees. And I think a number of teams are having these similar issues. And this is going to be something that vexes the Cowboys. And most importantly, CeeDee Lamb already not off to a great start. No depth at wide receiver right now, at least until Michael Gallup returns. I think there's a lot not to like about this offense in general.
I think you're right that's actually should be the headline, right? I saw that the Cowboys odds dropped to win the division and go to the playoffs. How much of that really was the Dak Prescott injury? Because I think even if Dak had played the whole game, the results might not have been.
Whole game, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe some of it is the Buccaneers, but I just think in general we saw a lot of week one offensive line issues that need to either be corrected or they're going to destroy us.
Yeah, and the Steelers and the Bengals offensive line, Lyle Collins,
right?
And, I think
Packers,
you're right.
Big injuries, the Rams, with issues and now injuries. Somebody got Andrew Whitworth on speed dial, I'm sure, and apparently he's not answering.
Yeah, he shouldn't. And we're going to watch the Ravens. They lost Jawan James, the backup to Ronnie Stanley. We'll see if Ronnie Stanley's going to be back.
Stanley's back.
You mentioned Green Bay too. Josh Nijman can't do it all himself. I think they had Zach Tom, the fourth rounder, who was looking good in camp, but it's a big jump up to regular season play. They're hoping to get Elkin Jenkins and David Bakhtiari back, and so on and so forth. And you can really play this both ways, because what's always the theme of week 2, Bob? Like, don't overreact. Well, and it's good. I always say don't overreact, but don't fail to react either, because we always want to be asking ourselves is, okay, we know we're going to recontextualize. We know that when we watch the Rams play the Falcons, we will understand how much of what happened in week 1 is just the Bills defense is that good, and how much of it is the Rams who lost another starter in Brian Allen. So how much it is, this isn't going to be the same. Maybe Matthew Stafford's elbow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we what we watched in week 1, what it means is going to change based on what we see in week 2. Go ahead.
This is the key, right? What is week 1 is not week 2, will not be week 5, right? Everything is going to be a progression and an evolution. And I'll roll out my hacky old cliche right now. September is the new August. There's, look at that game last night. Russell Wilson not hitting any of his wide receivers, not being in sync. Maybe there was something to him not playing all preseason long, all throughout the exhibition game. Look, and it's a two-edged sword. I mean, we don't want to see guys hurt, but Geno Smith did play every game, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll be gosh darn if Geno Smith didn't look sharp. So I'm not saying that everyone should be out there, going full bore all August long, but maybe there's a lane that people need to find it. Or maybe it's just okay from an NFL perspective when you're investing $500 million, $250 million in a commodity to be very protective of it until the games really matter. And then you'll just figure it out and cobble it together as you go along. And that seems to be the kind of the default position. And, maybe I'm okay with that when I'm not getting players hurt, but honestly, it just seems like this. I think we talk about this every year almost as like the early season volatility for offenses. And, I want to be like super smart and come up with this great plan or theory or concept that helps us navigate this, but there is not one. It's so volatile. You don't know what's going to happen. And what we did see last week, expecting to see some of the same things this week. Sure. We're going to expect some of them, but these are really nuanced situations that have a lot of moving pieces and not just like, oh, wow, Cam Akers sucks, right?
Right.
Okay. That may not be wrong, but also there are other parts to this story, right? So we need to just kind of, the thing I've been trying to come up with is how do we survive September and put ourselves in the best position in October? And I think some of the things are you don't have any studs. Right. There's the old theory, start your studs. Well, your studs have to reveal themselves. Mm-hmm. And, the FOMO, the fear of missing out is a real thing. And that's why we tend to play guys into week 4, even when they're not delivering. And I just wonder if that's not where we're going wrong. If you just don't let your studs identify themselves early, like, are you playing Allen Robinson this week?
I think so. I mean,
I think you are, but what if somebody rose up and you said, wow, let's say you had Devin Duvernay. Like, I don't think Devin Duvernay is a thing. I think, he's the Isaiah Likely, the Duvernay. There's going to be James Prochet. It's going to be DeMarcus Robinson.
Right.
Each week it's going to be a different thing. So, we've got to figure out a way, though, to identify who our studs are. And when you hear something like Matthew Stafford, pointing to the fact that, wow, they ran its own defense. That's why we couldn't hit Allen Robinson. What? You've never seen that before, Matthew?
Yeah.
This zone defense is a confounding new thing you haven't, and Allen Robinson hasn't seen. So, boy, a lot to figure out, and try to let some studs identify themselves, and don't be afraid to go with some guys if they do rise up. I'm not, suggesting I'm starting, Devin Duvernay over Allen Robinson, but I'd like to see Allen Robinson do something before I burn that roster spot again.
Yeah, well, momentum's important. There's a lot to sort through here. I think that, like you said, I'll come up with a little adage. Offenses will get better as the season goes on.
Yes.
Or at least for the first month or two of the season, because I think identifying the why as we go along is so important. I think there are going to be some offenses. It's just, I watch the Saints. The Saints, I don't know if it's going to be 2 quarters or 2 games or a game and a half. But for a lot of these teams, like you said, the preseason is going to extend into the season. So as we watch these things transpire, we're going to have to be very cautious about reading in long-term implications until things level off. It's turbulence on takeoff or something like that. You haven't reached cruising altitude yet. Then you also have all these new install offenses or new coaching regimes or new quarterbacks or, like you said, new chemistry developing. So what we really have to be open to is optimism or avoiding pessimism or avoiding getting latched onto the negative. But I suppose we also need to avoid getting too latched onto the positive, but as opposed to taking away, and I guess part of one of the things I wanted to get at, because you're one of the most level-headed people to talk to you about this, is what is actually worth reacting to in week 1. Because you mentioned the Buffalo and the Rams game. And I think one of the things we can take away from that, especially with how bad the offenses looked, is, wow, Buffalo's on a mission. Josh Allen's on a mission. This team is on a mission on both sides of the ball, and you want to be attached to this team in some way, right? Like, it's worth it to pick up Zach Moss on the waiver wire or Isaiah McKenzie or whoever, just because this is going to be that well-fertilized soil where good things are going to grow. With the Rams, you wonder if it's Super Bowl hangover. The reports about I'm in the room next door and I can hear Sean McVay just laying into his team, and it could just be like, come on, guys.
Thanks, Joe Reedy.
Yeah. He's been around for a long time.
The Chargers, dude, lurking in the outside the garage door. I love it.
Yeah, well, but I think that's important to try at least to give us a theory, a working theory or context on what happened. Is it just that the Rams offense isn't going to be good? Is it just that the Rams defense is going to be able to just roll over? That's too simple. I do want to go back to Baltimore. You mentioned Baltimore, and for a good part of that game, the Jets were stalemating the Baltimore offense. And the hope that, mentioned Ronnie Stanley, we'll see if he's back. Juwan James, again, the backup left tackle who played, he went down with a season-ending injury. But I wonder if that Ravens offense that we were used to seeing with Lamar Jackson, where that ground game was the first priority, both on offense and for the defense to stop, and then that was setting up the passing game, that we might see by necessity, and just like the first half of the year last year, Lamar Jackson's arm, Lamar Jackson as a passer. But you would think that's great news if you got Rashod Bateman. That's great news if you have Mark Andrews. And actually, it seems like you mentioned, different guys, a pretty wide target tree in that offense. And Rashod Bateman had a 55-yard touchdown on a busted coverage. But otherwise, he was going to be one of the biggest duds of the week. Do you think that there's validity in at least being open to that being the model? Or do you think this is going to get concentrated on Andrews and Bateman eventually?
I think it'll get concentrated on Andrews and Bateman eventually. I think there will be normalization. A lot of these things, so we look at, these things as standalone events, and they're not. Just like, over the course of an offseason, we follow the news and you hear what people are saying, you listen to what the beat writers say, and then you watch and you measure what they said against what's happening at various points in time. And we'll talk about James Robinson at some point, but that's a prime example. Or Michael Thomas, both of those guys, where I've literally talked to every single beat writer who covers the team, and they've all said the same story told me happy stories about those guys. And so then you watch what's happening and you measure against that and see, are these things coming true? And in the case of Robinson, he doesn't go on PUP. He's taking full contact. He's not on the injury report. Maybe everything everyone was telling him was true, but that, what we're trying to look at is a broader view. And so that's like when you have concerns about a player like Allen Robinson, you look back and let's broaden up the view. Well, you can broaden it up to last year and say, well, damn, it's still not very good. You got to go back a little ways to see it's better. But with the Ravens offense, you kind of know where it's going to end up. There's going to be a wide receiver, and Mark Andrews is going to be the de facto wideout one. And there's going to be another wide receiver who's going to be fairly productive, and it tends to be just one guy. And if that changes, I'll be surprised. They do need to get the rushing attack sorted out. And we've seen in the past, Greg Roman turn recycled trash into something semi-usable. Maybe we'll see that with Kenyon Drake, not Mike Davis. No, time's over. Sorry, Mike. And that goes back to something, I was hearing last year too. D'Orlando Ledbetter would just, rail against the guy. And so, I just think it's interesting to see that how if we broaden our perspective a little bit, maybe we find some clues and some answers to some of these things. But I think the Ravens case, we know what they want to be, and they're gonna work their way towards that, even if it takes a few weeks.
Stubbornly, even maybe.
Yes.
Maybe. I mean, it's and again,
maybe to their detriment.
Right. There could be these indicators where they lose a game because they run the ball 30 times for 80 yards, but that's actually setting the foundation for that running game to get back online. And, again, we're always trying to recontextualize the stuff to see what's actionable. I'm gonna toss some open-ended questions at you, Bob. All right. So I'm going to keep you on your feet here. First of all,
I'm standing, so I can.
Yeah. Oh, you're already on your feet. Perfect.
I'm already on my feet.
Okay, Bob, what is anything from week one that made you reconsider a belief you had going into week one?
Boy, there's a lot of things.
Good.
So
there should be.
So one thing that I think we do is fantasy managers. I go back to Frank Coyle, the old draft guy who used to say we rely on the Hindu theory, the reincarnation. This is the next this, this guy is the new. And I think we do that. We project onto players things that maybe aren't true. And I'll go to Robinson, like every guy who has a torn Achilles can never do anything again because no other guy ever has. And likely that's true, but every situation is different. Everything has some nuance to it of its very own accord. So watch out for those things. But in general, just like a little surprised at the rookie running backs getting off the slow starts, Breece Hall in particular. I guess I was not believing that Michael Carter was the heartbeat of the Jets offense. I believed he could be that from the sidelines, cheering on as Breece Hall plundered the opposing defenses, but apparently that's going to be a little bit of a process. And so, the running back situations to me seem to be the things that, Miami, it's encouraging, but is it all together yet? Now we have openings in San Francisco. There's intrigue in Chicago, I think now, the stories we've been hearing all off season long, the drumbeat has been building, the Khalil Herbert drumbeat and the performance demonstrated that. The Texans, where the rookie couldn't get the job done. And, we should have had an idea about this in general, just that, Houston is so bad at offense and even worse at running the football in particular. And I didn't see a lot of changes to their offensive line. I know a lot of people were all in on Pierce. I thought he would have a clearer path to workload than he does. Rex Burkhead, I think it's the haircut. Yeah, it's very nice too. But just, they averaged 3.4 yards a carry last year. This year was, this first game was slightly under that. They are who they told us they were. So I don't know if any of these things were shocking, but they kind of like you go, damn, I should have known this.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? There's some that we just say, well, that caught everybody off guard, right? Carson Wentz is reborn. That caught everybody off guard. And then there are ones that, like you say, hey, the signs were there. The signs were there. One of the patterns I think that's emerging, I think this is about 3 years running, Bob, that I always mention this, that when I started really avidly playing fantasy football, it was all about getting the right rookie running back. We knew a rookie running back, and it even was true until recent years, I think. The right rookie running back, and I know Elijah Mitchell hit last year off the waiver wire, but I'm talking about a foundational piece of your fantasy team. I can remember the year that the debate was, do you take LaDainian Tomlinson or Michael Bennett? And you were taking them in the first or second round as rookies.
Yep.
And you were always trying to get that rookie because we knew at least one rookie. And it makes sense, right? Running back's a young man's position, the fresh legs, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that we've also seen like fewer and fewer big seasons for running backs, say over the age of 27. But at the same time, I feel like the last 2 years, and I think we're going to have year 3 now of this, rookie running backs have almost universally disappointed for fantasy football. And go ahead.
No, well, just I think there's, something I mentioned earlier is a big part of this is the amount of money given to quarterbacks. If you can't block for those guys, you're not going to be on the field, right? When there's $250 million invested in a single player, and, I'm sure that every, owner shows film of Lawrence Phillips or not blocking for Steve Young against Arizona, letting Aeneas Williams end his career. And that's and this is the fear in everybody's mind. And so when these players come in and they're not well versed, which seems odd, like these guys are playing in spread offenses, a lot of them. Maybe some of the top backs are not. So, but it takes a while to learn that part of the game apparently, and that's slowing the progress in my estimation of a lot of them.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think that maybe, and I've talked about this where like you mentioned Rex Burkhead, assignment sound football is catnip for coaches. Yes. Right. And we want the running backs, especially again, those young legs that add value to touches, right? We want running backs who've got elusiveness and break tackles and have breakaway speed, but the car doesn't get out of the driveway if the quarterback's hurt. And also I think that especially with the ferociousness of NFL defenses, offensive coordinators, play designs, play calls are how they're trying to give their quarterback and their offense an edge. And if the running backs don't execute, then the plays don't work. So again, assignment sound football, I think that's one that we have to look at for Houston, because Houston had a good game script for Dameon Pierce. This should have been a game where they were playing with a lead. You mentioned the Jets. I'll just touch on that real quick and say there was a lot of indications that Michael Carter wasn't going away, and including just watching him last year.
Sure. And his college career suggested he's that guy, playing alongside Javonte Williams and being highly productive. I mean, that this, maybe he's not a full-time guy, but he can be more than a fly in the ointment. He can be like a small animal, a small mammal in the ointment.
You need a big tub of ointment. Look, and again, it's like, are these coaches rational in college, right? Dameon Pierce was a committee back at Florida.
Right.
Oh, he's going to be a lead back. Well, maybe he still will be. But you mentioned Miami. One of the things I want to say on Miami really quick is I love seeing Mike McDaniel succeed as an NFL head coach.
Yep.
And I think he could be revolutionary because he's not a typical NFL head coach in so many ways. I've said, Bob, he's the closest thing there is to one of us becoming an NFL head coach.
Yep.
Right.
I agree with that.
And you think of the NFL and maybe how much the traditional way of thinking is you have to have a leader of men, someone who's been there, done that, and just a strong alpha male kind of presence in the locker room. Mike McDaniel's none of those things. I think he tried to play football at Yale, and they told him, like, you're too light, like you're too thin, like, sorry, at Yale. I think that's right. Go ahead.
I think it's interesting that, Kevin O'Connell is taking that similar approach, although he's a former player and a big strapping lad and, all those things. He's taken a really interesting approach to running the Vikings, especially a team, coming off the total old school era with Mike Zimmer, where clearly the players had enough of that. Zimmer had enough of that. Hell,
right.
Zimmer was as tired of it as they were. Right. And so Kevin O'Connell came in and just like totally switched that around. And I think maybe some of this is just the youth, the younger group of coaches coming up who some of them have been, exposed as players or, have been around as young coaches that are trying new things, and it's working out pretty well for them. And I think we're going to see this, I don't think this is the end of this trend. I mean, sorry, Vic Fangio, but it's probably done.
Yeah, let it be so. And the Vikings are going to be interesting to watch too, because they hired a guy that was purely analytics until just last year.
Yep.
And then he went to Cleveland, where Andrew Berry showed him the ropes of this is how you run a franchise. These are some of the things that go into actually being a general manager. And then now you have a team that maybe another team, Minnesota is another good example of a different model. And we'll see about the running game. And again, this is one of those ones where don't be surprised. So we may watch the Miami running game stay stuck in the mud for 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. And then all of a sudden Chase Edmonds has a 120-yard game, or if Raheem Mostert can stay healthy, knock on wood, he has a 2 long runs and has a massive game. And then everything really starts to click for them. You mentioned Chicago, and I did the waiver wire report that I always do for Football Guys. Bob, I felt some remorse that I didn't put Khalil Herbert higher. I think I had Khalil Herbert as a similar tier to Jerick McKinnon and Jeff Wilson, and I had some remorse, especially after reading an Adam Johns piece at the Athletic saying, "Hey, these guys, the head coach, the offensive coordinator, they have been keen. I think was the word he used keen on Khalil Herbert." And go ahead.
So this goes back to June on the Football Diehards on SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio. Chris Emma from 670 The Score came on and he started planting that seed, it's just saying, and you know why these guys are doing that, because we don't all know for sure, but they think enough of it that they want to look smart when the season starts, right? And have been accurate. And he started planting that seed. He said, "Hey, these guys have no investment in David Montgomery. They maybe like him as a player, but they think Khalil Herbert's a better fit. They just do. Luke Getsy's offense. This is something Khalil Herbert is ideally suited for, and maybe Montgomery isn't." And so like we see these situations all the time where a new regime comes in, they're not invested in the former player. That's why I'm waiting to see what happens with Josh Jacobs. Do they run him the wheels off him like a rental car before they turn him in battered and bruised for the next driver, or do they take the usual New England approach? Looks like the New England approach for now, or maybe a mix of those two. But in Chicago, we started hearing this, a while back, and sometimes that's why you start watching and measuring. That's why we talk to all these people early in season. You measure, what's happening against what they said. Well, what's happening is Khalil Herbert looked like a better fit for this offense, right? As Dave Montgomery averaged a yard and a half carry.
And it happened as the game went on, right? And I think this is one of those things. I feel like the latest big trend right now is referring to all these different data points, right? Snap counts, target shares, the route targets per route run, breaking it down by situational. But it's a static snapshot of something, and it doesn't indicate what direction the arrow is pointing, right? I won't say where, but I saw some analysis of the Bears backfield today that said, don't worry, Dave Montgomery's going to get his. He was on the field more often. He was on the field in these situations. I think it completely ignores that if you watched the game and you saw the narrative, the story of the game unfold, it was, well, okay, Dave Montgomery, you got your chance. And then Khalil Herbert came in late in the game in a high leverage situation and was outstanding and didn't. I mean, if you watch that game, you think that second guy should probably be used more than that first guy. And I think the coaches are certainly open to that. And you're right to bring in narrative here and I think this goes for as we watch the season unfold with these new regimes, where if the regime doesn't have an investment in a player, and look, some of this is human psychology, because these decision makers are going to try to make themselves look smart, right?
Yes.
If they invested in a player, then they are going. It's Ryan Riddle, love Ryan Riddle, everything he contributes to the football community. He likes to say, first round picks, early round picks have to prove they can't play. Late round picks have to prove they can play. And I think just anytime you have that kind of investment, but if you look at that Bears game as, okay, well, Dave Montgomery is the incumbent. Dave Montgomery is given a lot to this team, blood, sweat, and tears. But we like Khalil Herbert. Khalil Herbert did nothing to keep them from continuing to change this split. And again, the Bears are another offense that come week 4, week 5, week 6, we might see the offense, especially because of the conditions. I think the Bears San Francisco game, Bob, is these ones, just throw it out, with the exception of how the players were used and what the results were, because that's the thing too. I wanted to circle all the way back around to Jacksonville, because you mentioned James Robinson. I was on I do an awesome show. Really, I would love to do something like this every week, or fantasy football needs this. I know that a lot of people that are listening to our stuff are actual fantasy football content creators. For all I know, Bob, it's all just the content creators, and there's not actually anybody else playing fantasy football. We all just consume each other's work. But Adam and Evan over Establish the Run had me on for this debate. We do a debate show where we, the players we're farthest apart on, and we make our case, which I think is really helpful, because especially in the preseason when you're building up your draft takes and your draft plans, you should be familiar with the takes that go counter to your strongest held convictions so that you're ready to act if you were wrong. And I think the emotional intelligence we have, that it just irritates you. It's the burr in your saddle when you have one of your closely held takes,
right,
and you start seeing things that tell you,
yeah, this is a great point. Like I say it like this: we tell ourselves happy stories about the players we want to invest in. We build these positive narratives, and I go back to something Peter King wrote years ago. Is someone asked him in his mailbag, "What team do you root for teams?" No, I root for stories, right? And so we're getting information from people because we do the same thing, right? As content creators, we tell a happy story about a player. We want to hold on to that narrative. The key to success is being able to divorce yourself from that narrative when the time comes and just say, man, I screwed that one up. Time to move on. Here's the adjustment I'm making to correct the course that I previously took that was not right. Yeah. And so, and I think the fantasy managers who are quick to, let go of that narrative, like, I'm not wrong yet because it's not over, right? I mean, I'll wait all year, I'll wait all damn year. He's still going to be good. So letting go of the narratives and divorcing yourself from the emotion and the investment in something, the same as an NFL team has to do. And we've seen it, I mentioned the Raiders, they've been quick to divorce themselves from the, cut away the deadwood from the previous regime. As fantasy managers, we need to be ready to divorce ourselves from the happy stories we've told and move on to the better stories and tell ourselves new ones. But it's not easy, man. Don't like to admit you're wrong, or and honestly, getting the circumstances can intervene and keep your happy story from coming to fruition just as much as you being wrong can, right? I mean, you might be wrong, but you might have only be wrong because circumstances dictated there was something happens, an injury, maybe an injury that's not even the player you're looking at, but an associated player, an offensive lineman or whatever, or quarterback. So these things are all are all complex situations, but be ready to move on from a thing once you see like, okay, it's not working. Okay, let's go do something else.
Yeah, and the metaphor I've been using, Bob, I know people are probably tired of hearing me say this, so listen to every one of my shows, is oftentimes you'll see the offensive lineman who gave up the sack is ready to recover the fumble because he knows the situation went bad. Yeah. He's the one who knows that it went bad because it went bad like in front of him. And that's with our takes that were like, these were the players I was building my draft around. And that's where the emotional intelligence comes in to tell you, like, it sticks in your craw. Like, I don't want to believe it. And it sets off alarm bells for you where someone else watching it is just gathering information. So let's circle all the way around to Jacksonville, because one of the players that Evan and I debated was Travis Etienne. Okay. And you can do the glass half full take on Etienne, which is he was explosive on his touches, and 2 different times he had possible touchdowns. One, he dropped badly, and because he's not actually that good of a receiver. I mean, his hands are not natural hands. You can watch the play where he dropped the ball at the goal line. And James Robinson scored later in the game on a very similar play in a development that I think there's no way to put a positive spin on that for Travis Etienne. No. The other one, though, was a very poor throw by Trevor Lawrence. And a lot of people who cover the team say Travis Etienne, including John Shipley, who I love, Travis Etienne is really important for this team because he's the only explosive player in the offense. So they need him. They need his explosiveness. But at the same time, this was basically a 50-50 split. I think it's clear, as it should be, that James Robinson's going to get goal line carries. I think James Robinson's the better runner. I think it would only take a debilitating injury to James Robinson where he wouldn't be a better runner than Travis Etienne. I mean, not to take away from Etienne's talents, but Etienne is more of like a early career Tevin Coleman type. Go ahead.
Maybe Urban Meyer got one thing right, and that is that Travis Etienne is better as like a chess piece than a feature back, which it seems odd because at Clemson he was like a total feature back. But that aside, I mean, maybe that is the thing he got right, and maybe he is just better suited as an associated piece, especially in this offense. But some of his issues are this entire offense are going to be tied to Trevor Lawrence turning into Trevor Lawrence. He's not there yet. So it's still a bit of a process. Like the coaches around him are, it's a much better staff, not just Doug Peterson, but the assistant coaches are all sharp dudes who a lot of experience in developing quarterbacks. So hopefully that comes around. But Etienne, I think his role, it's going to be some Mike Duraco wrote for ESPN, like way back in the summer. So if everything goes like the way it's heading, thinking James Robinson's going to have more carries and Etienne has like an equal number of touches as a receiver seems reasonable. I think that does seem reasonable, but Etienne's got to come up a little bigger as a receiver.
Yeah, I think that it's fair to say at this point, Bob, if there was some sort of prop bet, like who's going to have more fantasy value. I don't know how you would necessarily set the odds based on perceptions, but I think if you're putting the odds based on reality, well, James Robinson should have the better odds to be the most valuable, even though the ADP gap a week ago was, or a week and a half ago, was like a 4th round for ETN and 10th round for James Robinson. And we mentioned that Michael Carter, Breece Hall situation. This is again like letting go of ADP. I know I was thinking of Adam Harstad, my one of my favorite, one of the smartest people in the industry by a large margin. His head floating here and saying, statistics show that until week 4, ADP is a better predictor of output than the previous weeks in that season, right? It's like, again, it's like the don't overreact week 1.
Right.
We actually knew some things when we were drafting, right? Like the collective brain power of the fantasy football community and where we fixed these players in relation to each other actually has some predictive power in the first month of the season compared to what we're seeing. But it's always a case by case basis. I think there's some situations like that. I think the Packers are going to be a good situation like that because I think once they get, because the Packers were miserable in the opening game last year too. Sometimes teams are just slow starters. Yeah, well, yeah, relax. Oh, I guess since you're spelling it out like Aaron Rodgers, the Packers are a good one. Is there anything else out there that when we say the best advice right now is to relax, like tie up your hands so you can't go in and drop players or make trade offers that are too hasty? What's another situation or player that you want to advise people? Relax.
Denver Broncos in general, I think they'll, head coach jitters in the first game aside, and again, I mentioned Russell Wilson not playing a lot throughout the preseason. If you're, panicking on those wide receivers. So, look, Jerry Jeudy, by the way, my blind spot, I'm ashamed of, just in my draft blind spot for Jerry Jeudy. Just, every time I see him actually on the field doing something, I go, what the hell was I thinking? But, guys like Cortland Sutton are going to be fine, and we'll see how this backfield works out. Maybe they'll realize how much Javonte Williams needs to have the ball. I guess, I think what you're asking me, I feel like about every single thing. I want to say, take a giant step back, except one. And I'm going to say that Arizona. And here's the issue for me with Arizona is this is not, let's broaden the perspective a little bit. Late season collapses each of the last 2 years. Did we just see a continuation of the collapse in this first game? Is Cliff Kingsbury not the guy they hired? And I think maybe that's the bigger question. We've seen the lack of creativity in that offense and the way players are used and lined up. And then we heard him after the game, questioning whether the team is preparing itself properly or doing the right things in practice. Well, who decides that? Who's in charge of what gets done in practice and how the team prepares itself? Cliff Kingsbury. So I have concerns. Look, they, obviously injuries and issues with their wide receiving core, are a factor as well. But just in general, I don't like the direction this team is trending, and I had high hopes for it.
Yeah, one thing everybody got right in the preseason predictions on Arizona is the defense is going to be bad. And it's sad, too, in a way. I don't want to just dunk on them because J.J. Watt's hurt. They had Jeff Gladney, Reclamation Project, who tragically passed away this offseason, who was a former first round pick, still young, projected to be a starter. Then Antonio Williams, then he becomes a projected starter cornerback. He burns himself in a cooking accident. Just some of this stuff feels like almost destiny that this is going to be a defense that has a lot of trouble. And Vance Joseph ain't doing them any favors. They just signed Jalen Thompson to a long-term extension. They have arguably the best safety duo in the league. And there's a lot of defensive coordinators that say, okay, look what Buffalo did. Buffalo didn't have Tre'Davious White. They've got Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, and they were able to play that cover too. And they were able to really perplex the Rams offense. Vance Joseph, instead of using those two safeties, doing two high safety, he does a single high safety and throws all these blitzes at Patrick Mahomes, which is what the whole league seemed to understand last year is what you don't do. Here's what's not going to work. Whenever you play Patrick Mahomes, have a single high safety and blitz him and dare him to beat you. Because guess what? He's going to beat you. So the idea was that, well, hey, the defense is so bad that the offense is going to have to just play track meet style to keep up. But the problem with that is that the defense gets tired, the defense stays on the field longer, which begets longer drives, which begets shorter time of possession, fewer opportunities. And yeah, you had some garbage time, but I certainly don't think we were saying take Cardinals because of garbage time. No. Take Cardinals because of what they're going to do when the game is out of hand. Now, this week they get the Raiders. So these teams are, I don't want to say they're truly mirror images of each other, but let's just say bet the over in this game.
Okay. Yeah, better offenses and defenses for sure.
And perhaps it could be a flip because of DeAndre Hopkins, because the air seemed to go out of the balloon in this offense when DeAndre Hopkins came in, went out last year. And this year he starts out suspended. And maybe when he comes in, things will bounce back for this offense. But maybe by then there'll also be demoralization. There'll also be this idea that Steve Keim needs to be fired. Cliff Kingsbury needs to be fired. Yes, Kyler Murray is the quarterback long term, but who's going to be the people around him? And that's one of the things I love. And I know you see it this way too, Bob, is one of the things that makes the NFL so compelling in fantasy football and all this stuff is that every game is a chapter in a great story, the stories of franchises, of players, of coaches. And when you step back, often you can look back and it makes sense. I think it was Kierkegaard who said something like life makes sense in reverse, but has to be lived forward, so we only see how things fit into these arcs and these narratives after the fact. But if we can even just get a little inkling of that thread, and like you're saying, one of the threads here is just that Arizona maybe as a franchise is disintegrating in this iteration. This is not going to work. This is just not going to work. And you see how when teams get discouraged, how it doesn't even matter what your analysis was of how the team's going to play, because that psychology plays such a big part in it. So I think
back
go ahead.
Think back to early this year where, Michael Bedwell, who, likes to be the boss of this team, was, took him a little while to figure out what he was going to do with Kingsbury and everybody. And then, the leaks that start coming out, who is behind that? I'm guessing it's Bidwell. I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, when all the chatter about Kyler Murray, who is making the complaints? I mean, we have an owner who is not happy with the product on the field. And that's something that shouldn't be overlooked in the dynamic any more than it should be with like a guy like David Tepper in Carolina, who is used to winning, right? This is right. In everything he does in life, he's used to winning. And here's this thing, he can't find a quarterback. Damn it, I'm going to do whatever it takes. So those are, they're, powerful people in charge of things can often be, the driving factors. And I think we may see that in Arizona.
Yeah, ownership matters, right? Ownership matters. And the way, and again, speaking about these chapters in the story and the great stories. And it's like, brought this up. I bring this up frequently, right? Fractals is like a clue, Bob, to the underlying nature of reality, right? And each little arm of the fractal looks like what the fractal looks like when you zoom out, look at the whole fractal. And some of these owners, and I think, Bob, it's owners who can't help themselves. It's owners who can't help themselves because they probably became billionaires on their
mostly named Jerry and Jimmy.
Yeah, well, it's
no, that was a gratuitous shot.
It's no, I take as many gratuitous. I'm here for the gratuitous. Let me get out my popcorn, because look, and I have a feeling that the folks who listen to the show probably have a pretty good idea what my politics are or what my ideologies are. But there's certainly a story in America of like who are the kinds of people that end up owning franchises, especially when you get like the second generation of the ownership, and you have, I think, a lot of people who are convinced of their own brilliance. I like to say the meritocracy is a myth. The idea that the United States is this giant meritocracy. I think when you get up, I mean, I understand why we sell it. There's so many things about raising a kid, Bob, where like we really teach them that this world is like a utopia, and we don't necessarily prepare them for the actual world that's out there. But I think with these owners, the reason it's like a fractal and these stories just keep repeating themselves is because they're so convinced of their brilliance. And I like you mentioned David Tepper. I feel like he's the kind of guy that thinks you fix everything by just yelling at somebody. Like if you just yell at the right person, you'll fix the problem.
You look at a lot of these people, and Mark Davis doesn't even know how to find a barber. How the hell can he run a team, right? How's he finding front office people and coaches to run his team? I'm hoping he's successful at some point, but and I'm sure he's a very nice man when you meet him. But just in general, the way that organization is run looks like him.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see about Baker Mayfield. Obviously, this week the job one is just to get Christian McCaffrey back at the center of everything in that offense. It should happen. That's a good one, Bob. That I would echo the Bob Harris point here of relax. Okay, it's going to be okay.
There will be adjustments made for in the end, coaches realize who their best players are. They want to keep their jobs. All these things work in our favor. And so when Matt LaFleur is saying, hey, I need to get Aaron Jones, he can't have 10 touches, or Matt Rule saying, yes, we have to get Christian McCaffrey and DJ Moore, by the way, more involved. I would expect they're going to do that because it's in their best interest.
Yeah, you would hope, and it's not difficult. It's not complicated. That's another thing about week one that was so jarring. I know they had a lot of stats about teams that had 95% win probabilities in the fourth quarter losing or something like that. But what it really represented to me was a lot of these outcomes of games. It's very difficult to know if they were valid, right? How did the Giants beat the Titans? How did the Steelers beat the Bengals? How did the Seahawks beat the Broncos? I mean, these are games that if you played them 10 times, that is probably the only time that those teams win. If you played 100 times, it might be the only time those teams win. But then, like we're talking about, that could also cause. I was saying to Cecil this morning, because he covers the Broncos. One of the shows within the show here is how is Cecil Lammy doing as a person covering the Broncos? It's like a therapy session for him on the couch. But maybe the very best thing that could have happened is that the Broncos lost this in the one way out of 100 ways they could have lost it, because it's going to get everyone's attention. Like we talked about Sean McVay yelling at the Rams. But I think relax is a good, it's a good overall, like you said, all of them. And that's why you should really be worried about the Arizona offense. I guess, again, kind of throwing it more open-ended, Bob, is there a player that either he's on your teams or not on your teams, but that you are either really excited that you were on this player, like even more excited than you were when you were taking them, or alternatively, a player that you don't have, but you've got that FOMO, you've got that sense of like, oh man, I really wish I had been higher on this player.
Yeah, one of each of those. The first one is Michael Thomas, who I've been firmly planted on. The flag was planted early. I'll throw Alan Lazard in there as well, a guy who, mostly when I was getting him in double-digit rounds, I'm thinking this is a potential league winner. My co-host on Sirius, Jeff Mann, said the other morning, quarterbacks make wide receivers, right? And he plays with a guy named Aaron Rodgers. And if Aaron Rodgers, who has every comment he's made has been a positive comment, is, future Hall of Famer, wide receiver one, all these things. So I like that. But Michael Thomas was a guy, even if you never expected 2019 Michael Thomas to rear his head again, and I don't, thinking he's not going to be a really good player seemed like a reach, especially after hearing every single beat writer, Mike Triplett, Catherine Terrell, Larry Holder, John Hendricks.
And these are tenured beat writers too. These aren't people who just came onto the beat like a year ago.
Everyone, giving these glowing reviews, like, man, his mind is right, his body is right. And granted, the hamstring slowed him down, but I haven't been investing in him since February, and with abandon. And I'm really glad I did. And one that I have been totally off of, that I wish I had not been totally off of, was Saquon Barkley, who I just hadn't seen the explosive abilities that I saw in this game for sure against Tennessee. But also I felt like, like Brian Dable, I think he's a really smart guy. I think he's an offensive wonderkind, and all these things. But did I expect the Giants offense to make the leap? And it's worth remembering how bad they were last year under Joe Judge. They were, they scored, I think, 23 offensive touchdowns. They averaged 15 points a game. It was horrible, right? And so, I expected Brian Dable to come in and get it cleaned up and get it pointed in the right direction. I didn't expect it to come out of the gates like a rocket, So I did. I was totally averse to drafting Barkley, especially as his ADP rose up into that, running back one territory. Now I'm kind of regretting that I didn't get some shares when he was cheaper.
Yeah, I think the common thread there, Bob, is when a player shows us he's elite. I don't mean that he's productive. I don't mean he can take the advantage of a good situation. I mean an elite player, one of the players that truly separates himself. And again, in Barkley's case, the teams that he was a top 5 fantasy running back on for the Giants weren't good teams.
No,
it wasn't like he needed to play for a good team. He did need to be used at least with some competence, which we did not see in the last 2 years, and he needed to stay healthy. And I think it was Dwayne McFarland who pointed out that his injury last year was a fluke, and actually the
total fluke. One of the weirdest injuries ever. Yeah. Stepping on a foot, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and he was eased back in at the beginning of the season, and then he kind of looked like his old self, and then he got hurt, and by the time he was healthy-ish again, the Giants had kind of given up on the season, and that's that. And congratulations to whatever team gets Barkley in free agency next year. I mean, that's what we're looking at. And with Michael Thomas, and I think this is something really important to point out, that the beat writers were telling us, like you said about the Khalil Herbert, David Montgomery situation. Buy low, sell high, sell low on David Montgomery. I think there are certain players, and again, I can point to the little sign of Adam Harstad saying, hey, ADP is more predictive than week 1 or week 2. but it's for some week 1 and week 2 is going to be the most predictive piece of data. And I think with David Montgomery or with any of these players, depending on how you feel about them, Travis Etienne is another good example. Breece Hall is another good example. If they were drafted in the 4th round, or Montgomery maybe 5th or 6th round, and you can still get 8th round value for them, depending on where your conviction is, you're going to look at that as a good value. You're going to, like, getting out of David Montgomery. I think that's one I've got conviction on. Getting out of David Montgomery, assuming that there's somebody who thinks they're going to be smart and they're going to buy low on him. And of course, that's where the rubber meets the road in trading, is finding that other partner who has the opposite view of you. So you can see these two commodities as the same value, even though really you see them as very different values. I like it. I like the excitement about Michael Thomas and Saquon Barkley. And I think also one of the things I want to point out about Michael Thomas, like you mentioned about the positive reports, I think the negative reports got personal about him. And I know that in 2020 down here in New Orleans, there was a lot of talk that he and the franchise were really on the outs. Remember, there were trade rumors. There was a lot of idea that, like, this was a divorce that was impending. And it seemed like sometimes with these situations, maybe this will happen with Kadarius Toney and Brian Dable, right? Where given enough time and talent and ability and dedication can win out. And with Michael Thomas, the beat writers were telling us that was happening. They were all telling us.
And how much of that was Sean Payton leaving too? Maybe, there was some, and how much of the negative reporting coming out, how much of the negative chatter was coming from maybe the head coach. You don't know that, but I do think, sometimes you get these changing situations, but I don't think that bodes well for Toney though, going in where, the talk started almost immediately after Dable and Shane take over. That, man, this guy, we need to get rid of this guy, basically. Yeah. And so that played out week 1. Maybe it is just, tough coaching. They're trying to get him to come around to their ways. But when you have a player that talented, clearly when he's on the field, he's a super talented player. When you're keeping him off, there's reasons for that. And we'll see what they are.
Yeah. Teams have their way, right? Coaches have their way. And Dable is basically part of that Bill Belichick tree. Go ahead.
I like Dable, the point in the game where he went over and just got in Daniel Jones' face, and then came out and asked him to do some stuff after that, put the game on his shoulders, essentially, after barking at him on the sidelines, and he responded, right? Yeah. So, I'm not like totally, I always liked watching those little moments, but we'll see how this coaching works with a guy like Kadarius Toney. Yeah,
and maybe it's just one of those things where, again, in these first years of the regime, you're seeing who fits and who doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that, and my man Eric Stoner, we're always one of the very best person you could possibly ask for to be in your text messages as on a Sunday as things are unfolding. And he'd mentioned the second time I mentioned this on a Footballguys show this week that he felt like, great, because they won the game, Dable's going to feel vindicated about the way he's handled Toney and say, okay, But at the same time, I think that we probably underestimate the difficulty, and I think this is where Mike Tomlin is like Hall of Fame, right? In managing all of these men, young men and men, and keeping their trust, having credibility, and creating a culture of accountability and a sense, this is one of those things, again, Dable coming from the Belichick tree, that there was always this talk that, hey, Belichick would treat Tom Brady like everybody else. And that players would see that. The players would see that, or this is why players that didn't fit in other locker rooms, didn't fit in other organizations could come. And as long as you were serious about football, maybe there were other things that gave, hey, you come in, and if you have the dedication to football and you show up on time to the meetings, you don't, like, what were the rules for the Belichick organization, Bob? Don't talk to the media ever. I don't ever want to hear you ever talking to the media ever about anything ever, and show up on time, Yeah. You do those things.
Michael Hawley's book, Patriot Raid, is the book to read to get all the insight on that, and just some of Belichick just going off in team meetings about a quote in a paper or whatever.
Yeah.
Some little thing, and just that's not how it goes, guys.
That's not how it goes. Right.
But there's part of that is that's easier to pull off when you're winning, right?
Right.
When you're super successful, that flies really well. Players love that when you're winning. When you're not winning, players do not love that.
Right. And that's why Joe Judge failed. And that's why Matt Patricia failed. And that's why the Belichick way, we've had some semi-successes on the GM side, I think, on the personnel side. I think Brian Flores, again, ownership matters, right? Ownership intervened here. And we can't really say, as a Steelers fan, I'm really excited that Brian Flores is part of that defense. And maybe it's not any kind of coincidence that the most outstanding not just the most outstanding defensive performance of the week, Bob. I mean, that was one of the most outstanding defensive performances we've ever seen, period. And I think when we see Cincinnati against Dallas, so we'll put it into proper perspective.
Easy, Yinzer. There were issues for the Bengals.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line issues. I think
right.
I think what really impressed me, Bob, it was like an old 15-round fight. You know, they don't they don't go 15 rounds anymore. They go 12 rounds. And it was like the Steelers, like they had enough to win a 12-round fight, but this was a 15-round fight, and they found a way, even after one of their fists was tied behind their back when TJ Watt went down. They figured it out. They Minka Fitzpatrick blocking an extra point, and I don't know what happened to Evan McPherson on his field goal attempt, and maybe it takes the cause.
Might just be the center, the injury to the long snapper.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, these little things, you know, that might have been a big deal. Although McPherson would take that abuse.
Yeah, and look, this is one of those things that I say this as a Yinzer, as a Steelers fan, because this might be all we have to hold on to, at least until Kenny Pickett gets in, is this stirring victory. But we're into the off the rails time. All right. I guess I have to ask, and I feel like I've asked you this before, Bob, and we've done a lot of couch sessions together. But I want to revisit it because you called me out correctly as a Yinzer, and yeah, I'm going to get excited. Really, what I'm excited about is O'Neal Cruz. I'm excited about a baseball player, right? But do you have, or how would you ascribe your rooting interests? I don't think you have a team.
I don't. I hate them all equally.
But what about, because someone said rooting for stories. You know, what are the things as you watch football on a Sunday, other than fantasy fortunes and how we look with our advice and things like that do drum up some emotions in you?
Look, I just love watching football. I just love football in general, right? So I don't care who's winning or losing. I mean, I'll get caught up in the moments of who's winning or losing a game, or decisions that are made or not made, or plays that are made or not made. But I just love watching the game. I just love watching players go at it, the physical nature of the play up front, the finesse of the wide receivers, just the amazing ability of players. You know, just like until you're standing next to them, you don't really realize what these guys are. And you watch a wide receiver go up. You've heard me talk about it before, the physics of the game, right? I mean, we're watching people put torque on joints and things that were never meant to be put there, and they do it play in, play out. And, 240-pound wide receivers leaping into the air and landing on their ass, and sorry, Joe, and coming down, and making, getting, I mean, just the thing that these athletes are capable of that we totally take for granted just because we're watching it 1,000 times every Sunday. I try not to take for granted. I just try to watch every player and look at the things they're doing and think, wow, that is truly remarkable. And honestly, it gets more remarkable every year. They push the boundaries of that. Every single year of what the human body is capable of, and just the mental aspect to go with the physical aspect. There's so many pieces that go with it. So that's why, when someone comes up short or doesn't meet expectations, it's hard for me to get disappointed because I know what all is going into this. I mean, it's not like they're out there playing in a vacuum. They're playing with 21 other people, and then there's coaches involved and all these other 21 players. We see players excel in college that are so much better than all the talent around them. So you look at the gap of the talent levels in college, maybe it's 5 to 10%, range. At the NFL, it's like 0.5%, right? Everyone can play. And so when you see someone really standing out, you know what it takes behind the scenes to get there. You see a Derrick Henry, a person of that physical size and speed, moving around and making the plays he's making. It's remarkable. That's the part I love. I don't root for anybody or anything other than my fantasy fortunes, but just love watching the game. That's kind of what keeps it going.
Yeah, Bob, I've always said that, especially from a mind, body, soul commitment level, the NFL is total. It's total. I mean, you see what happens if any of that wavers. I mean, if it wavers at all, like you said, that 0.5%, there's no margin of error. And it's sad. I mean, oftentimes it's the tragic side of the league, what happens. And it's why I'm really excited, or maybe excited is not the right word. I'm heartened that more and more players are retiring around like year 7, year 8. I know you saw the thing about Aaron Donald handed his retirement letter over to the team. That makes me feel good. That makes me feel great. Get your generational wealth, right? Make your name. And then when you still have your body, you still have the sound mind, go live life. I really feel for the players, and I know we know way too many of these stories, Bob, and there's been way too many players dying young. so many. I was really affected when I heard that Marion Barber died.
Yeah.
And I was affected even more when I saw that the accounts of what kind of state he was in before he died, because he always struck me as a player where there was depth, right? There's the picture, the lasting picture from Hard Knocks where like they're partying, I think was it like T.O.'s place or something like that, and then next door Marion Barber's there in a dark room by himself playing the piano.
Right.
And I just feel like the players are, because of the level of that commitment and because of what happens, I feel for the players where all they know is football. Their life has always been football, and they don't even know how to approach a life after football. They don't know what, I mean, that's why I love seeing Andrew Luck. He's happy. Andrew Luck looks happy. Right?
He looks like he could not be farther from football at all. There doesn't seem to be any issue for him. But other guys stay involved and look equally happy. Like you watch the Manning cast, right? Sure. Peyton Manning loves football, loves the game, except when Nathaniel Hackett isn't calling a timeout. But there can be involvement, at different levels. But that daily grind level, that taking care of yourself, all the things that go into nutrition, health, working out. It's we can I'm old enough to remember when players went and drove Coke trucks around or sold insurance in the offseason, and then showed up, and that's why they needed a training camp. Now it's a 365-day a year process to have yourself ready to play football. And these guys all know it. So it's you're what maybe used to be a long career is now like compressed into just a few years because of the effort you're putting in over the course of the off seasons as well.
Yeah, burning really brightly, but burning out quickly because of that commitment that everybody puts in. And I have called it like NASCAR with bodies. Sometimes I think
I say about a running back every week is like 25 car collisions.
Oh, yeah, it's brutal. I remember that old stat about offensive linemen that was like running into your garage door full speed 10,000 times. Like that's like what a season is like for them. Like put the pads on. But on this note, let's make it positive. Who was one of the first players or games or one of your first memories of when the NFL really captured your imagination and set you on this course?
I want to say it was a Colts-Cowboys game, and O'Brien kicked the field goal. And my dad was a big Cowboys fan, and just the watching his emotions, my dad a really, even keel guy for the most part, but just watching him as he just sunk, the horror. And I just thought, wow, what is behind all this? But then, more so, started playing when I was like 8 years old and in youth football and stuff. And just playing is what, really builds up the love of it. So, just knowing what goes on behind the scenes.
What position did you play, Bob?
I started out as a lineman, ended up as kind of a fullback, and then
fullback. I can see that.
Played briefly in college and junior college, and then got my injury and called it a day.
Yeah, I'd see the fullback. That's the throwback position, right? That's a position that's becoming extinct. But this is funny. I'm gonna probably like lose listeners and I shouldn't do this because I don't want to hurt the Football Guys brand. I played until sixth grade, and sixth grade was whenever the practices were more drills and not like actually playing football. And I was like, I want to play football. But you never lose love, especially coming from Western Pennsylvania. And being born in 1975, like I was, I mean, but by the time I was a kid, like in the elementary school or middle school, where there were clubs like, Young Astronauts Club or Future Business Leaders of America or Future Farmers of America, there was the Steelers Club. It was just a club about the Steelers and loving the Steelers, although those were the not great times in the 80s.
Funny, I went to college at Eastern Arizona Junior College in Arizona, Thatcher, Arizona, a tiny little town. And there were more players from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. Yes. Than any. I go, what the hell's an Aliquippa? What?
They were a little steel town, high law. Oh man, Tony Dorsett. My mom used to tell the story that one of her cousins married Tony Dorsett, and there's another part of the story that I can't tell. It's Western Pennsylvania. It's all close knit. It's always close knit here on the Audible, on the couch with Bob Harris, always one of our favorite guests to spend time with. And again, Bob tells us he's been around here a little while, folks. Relax. And we like to relax together. Football Guys has so many things going on for you, folks. I don't know if you knew, by the way, we're even doing monthly subscriptions now. So if you haven't dipped your toe in the waters, if you want to check it out, you can do that. But otherwise, we've got so many things going on. Fantasy football world is alive. The hills are alive with the sound of music, and fantasy football is alive with the sound of all of our takes. And Bob's message again, to relax. So we love relaxing with you folks. You are the very best because you're so classy.